and welcome back to Ronnie the Reader. I, of course, am Ronnie, and I am here today to do an April wrap-up with you. So I finished 6 books in the month of April, and I did DNF 2, and I'm in the middle of 1. So I'm going to be talking about all of those books here. You know how a wrap-up works. So let's go ahead and jump right into the DNFs. So like I said, I had 2. The first book on the DNF list is Time to Shine by Rachel Reed. This is a male-male adult hockey romance story that I got about 50% of the way through. And at that point, I just no longer cared. I wasn't really connected to the characters. It's following our main characters of Landon and Casey has been a professional hockey player for a couple of years. And Landon is a professional, but more in the minor leagues, and he gets called up to be a goalie for a major league hockey team, who Casey is obviously playing for, and they meet and they kind of start a relationship. By the time I had gotten into the 50% mark, I just wasn't invested. I did like Landon. I found Casey to be a tad grating and difficult to get through some of his chapters, and I found Landon to be the much more likable, compelling main character, and I think if the entire book was through his POV alone, I probably could have finished it, but also at the same time, I just wasn't invested in the relationship between the two. I ended up DNFing that one. That was an audiobook that I was listening to. And then an ebook I ended up DNFing was The Hideaway Inn by Philip William Stover. And this is another male-male adult romance story. It's a little bit shorter. It's like a novella length. It's like 230 pages, I think. And I started this and DNF'd it after the first chapter because I really just didn't like the main character and the voice that they were using in the first chapter. And I normally don't do this, but I then went and read some reviews of this book to see what other people thought, and most of the reviews are leaning towards negative, and the main reason of that was not enjoying the main character. And so I can't even remember that character's name at this point, and it was a week ago that I decided to DNF it. So it hasn't even been that long, but granted, it was only a chapter. Regardless, I just decided to put it down and that it wasn't going to be worth it enough for me to finish. All right, so those were the books that I DNF'd, only 2. And then the one book I'm in the middle of is The Three-Body Problem. And this is obviously a really famous sci-fi story that is just really popular right now. And so hoping to finish this. I probably won't finish it in the month of April. It probably will carry me into May. But for next week, I do plan on having a video that will be featuring this book. So got to get it done within the week, and I feel like I will be able to do that. So books that I've actually finished, first and foremost, starting off with the first book is The Vegetarian by Han Kang. This is a translated work originally from Korea, I believe, and it is following the story of a woman who decides to stop eating meat after a really vivid dream she has. The book and it goes from there, and you actually are following multiple perspectives that are not the woman. Mostly you do get her thoughts at some points, but you're actually following 3 separate characters in 3 separate parts of the book, and I actually found that to be really enjoyable. But ultimately, for the book as a whole, I gave it 3 stars because I found it to be very slow, and it became very lyrical in a sense. Like it's a very well written book. Like the language used is good, obviously, but there's just always kind of a block, I think, and just the way that the story ultimately played out, I found myself questioning a lot of what is the point of this? Like ultimately the story does have a main thesis and it does get to its main point, and you see that, but it's through a lot of trees that you kind of have to get through to get to that part. And I have heard some criticism after I finished this book that some of the translation done maybe was not the best work. I don't know, I didn't want to dive into that. It's just some of the reviews that I did read said that sort of same sentiment. So I don't know if that's necessarily true or not, but I definitely found myself just feeling a little blocked from really connecting to the story, so it was a 3-star overall. The next book I finished will be also featured in that same video with The Three-Body Problem, and that is Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick. This is a really famous kind of classic sci-fi, originally published in 1968. Some of Philip K. Dick's best work. People would probably be most familiar with this story because it is actually what was adapted into the movie Blade Runner with Harrison Ford. And I actually did watch Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049 with Ryan Gosling after finishing this book, but I'll discuss that more in that video about sci-fi. As far as this actual book, I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I found it to be a really interesting story, and even though it's classic and a lot of people know it, and I had seen Blade Runner before a long time ago, like I think I was in middle school, I just didn't really remember what the story was. I will say the one slow part is that the book can be, I think, a little bit boring in the beginning. I think it is a little tough to get into, but once you are into kind of the thick of the story, I would say probably about 100 pages in, it really kind of goes from there, and I think it is quite actually fast-paced and very compelling. So yeah, like I said though, I'll talk more about this in that video next week, but this was a 4-star overall. The next book is another male-male romance, and spoiler alert, most of the books moving forward besides one were male-male romances. I really was kind of in a kick this month, and I feel like I'm still in that kick, but this particular book is Rebound Remedy by Christina D'Abo, I believe is how you pronounce this author's last name, and ultimately I gave this book 3 stars. It is a novella. It's only 128 pages, and what it is following is 2 characters, and one of our main characters gets dumped in a really brutal fashion at the airport right before he's about to go on this big kind of Christmas vacation with his boyfriend, and then he comes back and he kind of lives around this local bar that he goes into sometimes, and then him and the owner of the bar kind of connect. The story, even though it is a novella, it's only 128 pages, it does move pretty rapidly, and there are a lot of things that do happen, but one of the downsides of that is I thought the relationship development was not as strong, I guess, or better yet, I think it felt a little too rushed. This would be a great like smut book and like lust book, and I don't want to like spoil anything, but at the end of this book the word love is thrown around, and it's been about 2 weeks that these characters have known each other, and they've really only they get to know each other, but it mainly is based off of a strong sexual relationship, not necessarily a strong emotional relationship. And while I could see our characters building that, it wasn't built in the time that we did have on page with them. So if this was a longer novel length book, like between 300 and 400 pages, I think I could have really enjoyed it, because I did really like both of our main characters. They both felt very real, and their banter together was fun. It was fun to read. I really only gave this one 3 stars. But if this author, and I haven't done any research, if this author does have longer works, like full novel length of works, I maybe would check those out. But as far as this one, it was fine. It's good for, you know, a quick smutty read, like I said, but it's not a book that I will be thinking about in a week after this wrap up where I tell you about it. All right, next one, another male-male romance, this time one that I stepped out of my comfort zone to try to tackle, and that was Two Rogues Make a Right by Cat Sebastian. And this is a historical romance set in like the 1800s in England, and you're following a kind of a friends to lovers situation where one of our main characters is very sickly and the other main character is taking care of him. And ultimately, I give this book 2 stars. I just didn't like it. Like, historical fiction, I've always said historical fiction, not really my thing. I've never really checked out historical romance specifically. It's definitely not a historical, gay romance. But I know that Cat Sebastian nowadays is known for writing, like, historical romances, but ones that are set in, like, the 40s, 50s, 60s, I think, time periods. And so I wanted to just kind of check some of those out, but I picked this one up because it was a little bit shorter. It was only 288 pages. I'm just going to read this quick stat. I started this book on April 7th, and I finished it on April 21st. So that was 2 whole weeks that it took me to read this book, because every time I read a chapter, it just felt like it was going on and on and on and on and on, and like nothing was happening. And then all of a sudden I was reading a chapter, and then our main characters were kind of like, yeah, I guess we can like date, sort of, kind of, maybe. Who knows? We'll see what happens. I don't know. It just didn't feel like I liked either character. They both felt like they were very selfish people who didn't really deserve to be with anyone at this moment. Like, it really feels like they should probably be working on themselves and not necessarily working to be in a relationship together. And the book itself just wasn't that fun. I didn't have fun with it, so it was 2 stars. It's hard to say if the historical setting did contribute to that. I mean, I think it did. The book takes place in like one place for the majority of it. It really is just 2 characters who are not that likable sitting in one room talking for most of it. And it just wasn't fun. So 2 stars, wouldn't recommend. And I don't think I will be checking out Cat Sebastian's more modern historical works, but you know, never say never, but it's definitely not, they're not on the top of my list. There are other people I would probably reach for before I would do that. All right, and then the next is a YA male romance that I read, and that was My Fair Brady by Brian D. Kennedy. And I actually gave this book 5 stars. I actually really like this book. It's one of my favorites of the year so far. It's following 2 high school students. One is named Wade, who is a high school senior who is really into theater and doing school productions. Our other main character's name is Elijah Brady. And he is a sophomore and he's really shy, doesn't really know how to make friends, is just not really confident in a lot of ways. And so kind of through hijinks and things, this turns into a My Fair Lady / She's All That retelling where Wade agrees to kind of help Elijah become more confident and create this like Brady character that can kind of do all of the things that Elijah is too scared to do. And going in, you know that both characters are gay, and ultimately the story plays out in just a really cute way. Like, I'm not a huge fan of like the My Fair Lady, She's All That, like romance trope of like taking this kind of nerdy or like out of society person and like basically teaching them up to be a better version of themselves. But I thought it worked in this particular setting. I don't think that means that it will always work for me. I just think that the way the book was written did a really good job of making me like both characters, seeing their perspective, while also being able to forgive this slightly over the top, slightly non-realistic premise of a book. And something that really I enjoyed about this book was our main characters are having, you know, interpersonal problems between themselves and their families and their friends. And while reading that sometimes can get very annoying, because especially when you are reading, I found when you're reading up as an adult, I'm 27 now, I just turned 27 in March. When you're reading YA books, when you are, you know, a certain number of years removed, you obviously mature and see things a little bit differently. So something about this book that I really appreciated was that the characters were going through these struggles, and to them they seem very important and like, you know, very dramatized, as most teenagers do. But as a reader, you were also able to see kind of the other side of a lot of the things. Like one good example was with our main character Wade, who kind of has this internal feeling the entire book that his parents don't necessarily care about his theater career, and they really only focus on his 2 older brothers who are sports players and are playing sports in college. And so he feels very neglected and like they don't necessarily know how to talk to him, and he really feels like because he's gay, he doesn't necessarily get to talk to his parents about how he's feeling about certain relationships and those sorts of things. And that's totally valid to feel, but the way that the book was written and his scenes with his parents, it kind of made it not obvious, but you could definitely read between the lines that that's just the way he's feeling and that's what he's projecting as a character. So Brian D. Kennedy did a really good job of writing this book for teens, very accessible for teens, and I think something that teens really will enjoy. But if you are reading as an adult, you can see some of those more nuanced things of character, and also being just a really cute kind of love story. I will say, to me, the age gap of 2 years between sophomore and senior, while it doesn't seem like that big of a deal, and in real life, like 2 years is not that big of a deal, I think I'm just slightly uncomfortable with like age gaps in general. And even though they're like only 16 and 18, just like thinking about how Wade as a character, if we're meant to suppose these characters are going to be together at the end of the book, like he's going to be off to college, it just was a little weird for me. But ultimately, it was fine, and I gave this book 5 stars, and it's definitely one of my favorites of the year. All right, and then lastly, the last book that I finished was 0 Days by Ruth Ware. This is the latest Ruth Ware release, or actually, yeah, I think it's the latest Ruth Ware release. I think it came out in June of last year, of 2023, and she has another book coming out, I think, in June of this year. But 0 Days is following a couple named Jack and Gabe. Jack is a woman. She and Gabe are married, and basically they work for this company where other companies can hire them to test out like their ability to be hacked and broken into, essentially. That's like what they do. So at the beginning of the story, we are following Jack, who is on kind of one of these missions, and she's talking to Gabe like on her headset because they are partners and they kind of do things together. But then when she gets home, she finds that Gabe has been murdered, and basically the book turns into a on-the-run type thriller. So it's really different from a lot of previous Ruth Ware stories. Normally she does a lot more of the slower, darker, more atmospheric kind of academia type settings. Like typically her books are following very kind of literature-based characters who really like to read and are kind of just a little bit more introverted and have a little bit more of a tamer life than what Jack and Gabe are used to. And so while that is refreshing, the actual story of the book is just very boring and unrealistic. Like, I feel like if you're going to be unrealistic, at least make it exciting. And I didn't get excitement from this book. I gave it 2 stars, is ultimately what my final rating is. And really the only reason I finished it and didn't DNF it at the 50% mark was to say that I finished it. And it took me 11 days to get through. I started it on April 17th and finished it today on April 28th when I'm recording this video. And so it wasn't a book that I am going to think about. I don't think I will remember any details from this book. The ending was very obvious from the second that the characters introduced. It's kind of clear, you know, who did it and who killed Gabe. And the motive becomes very clear, I would say, by the, if you haven't figured it out by the 50% mark, by the 75% mark, like, you for sure are like, okay, this is clearly how this book is going to end. While I appreciate Ruth Ware trying to step out of her normal storytelling structures and kind of traditional tropes she relies on, this one just didn't work, like, at all for me. Like, and I feel really bad. And I mean, I think that seems to be the general consensus. I did read some reviews when I finished this book this morning, and it seems like that's what most people are kind of thinking. And Ruth Ware is such an interesting writer because some of her books are so good and some of them are just so bad. Like, I don't know. She's very inconsistent, but I will continue to read Ruth Ware. I definitely will be reading The Perfect Couple, I think is the title of her release that's going to be out later this year. Like, I still plan on reading that, even though I didn't enjoy this. I DNF'd The It Girl. Really the last Ruth Ware book that I thoroughly enjoyed was The Turn of the Key, which I think is the best Ruth Ware and one of the best mystery thrillers to be released within the last 10 years, in my opinion. 0 Days. The stories, also going back to the story structure, something I really dislike is long chapters, and the way that this book is broken up is between days, and so you get many, like, breaks essentially in each day where it's kind of like a new scene or something new is going on, but each individual day kind of acts as its own chapter traditionally that you can think of, and I just don't like that structure. I like very short chapters, like 3 to 4 pages at most for a thriller, like a mystery thriller. Like, that is my ideal structure. And so just going into this book, like, even the way that it was written already probably was not going to jive well with me, and it ultimately didn't. I am sorry for that. I am sorry for Ruth Ware. I did listen to part of this as an audiobook, did read some of it physically because I did have the physical book checked out from my library. And I will have to say once again that to Imogen Church, I think is the narrator's name for Ruth Ware's books, I just don't like the way she narrates the books, and so getting through the rest of the book via audio was tough, very grating. But yeah, I don't want to talk any more negatively about this just because, you know, I don't feel like it's necessary, and most people kind of have a similar opinion and share a similar opinion. Some people, though, really absolutely love this, really enjoyed the way that Ruth Ware tried to do something slightly different than what she's used to, and kind of something slightly different from your normal thrillers that you typically see on the market nowadays. So, all right, and that is it. That is the last book that I finished this month. So April overall, I think, was a good reading month. I felt very a bit slumpy in the sense that like I really just wanted like a good male romance book to read, and ultimately I found that in My Fair Brady. Like it really kind of scratched the itch that I was looking for in that genre, and now I'm like, okay, I really need like a good mystery thriller. And like, even though I did read uh, this book, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, and I gave it 4 stars, I'm really looking for that like high octane sci-fi as well going into the beginning of May. So that is some of the things that you can expect from me hopefully coming up next month. But as far as this month, be sure to let me know if you read any of these books and what you thought of any of them. And let me know if you have ever seen Blade Runner and what you think of the book to movie adaptation. Like I said, I'm going to be discussing that more in the sci-fi video that should be coming out next week. So we will discuss that a little bit more then, but feel free to start that discussion in the comments and let me know what your favorite book in the month of April that you read was. But until then, and until next week when I have a new video, I will talk to you then. Thanks so much for watching, and bye.